Hey YouTube, it's Zoe, or Read by Zoe, and today I'm going to do my March and April wrap-up. I wasn't able to do my March TBR last month because I was on my month-long hiatus, so that means I'm going to have to include it in this video, and that also means that I have a lot of books to share with you all, so I'm going to have to be pretty speedy quick. If you want any more of a review, you can check out my Goodreads, or you can ask me to do a review on any of the books that you want more detail of my opinion on. The first book that I read in March I actually mentioned in my February wrap-up video, and that was The Sky is Everywhere by Jandy Nelson. I ended up giving this 2.5 out of 5 stars, which is pretty unusual for me. Usually I read pretty good books because I get such great recommendations here on BookTube, and I generally like a lot of the books that I read, so I like to give 4s and 5s, sometimes the occasional 3.5, but it's been a while since I've rated a book below a 3. I gave this a 2.5 just because of the writing style. I thought that she was trying really hard to be relatable to teenagers, which made it a little bit weird and stilted, and like she was just taking this teen thesaurus of words and just plugging it in there. I thought it was kind of weird. Also, I didn't like any of the characters. None of them really stood out to me, and there was insta-love between Joe and Lenny. He just showed up at her house one day. The next book that I read was Shopaholic and Sister by Sophie Kinsella. This is the 4th book in the Shopaholic series, and as you know, I am pretty obsessed with this series at the moment. It's just so lighthearted and funny, and you can fly through this entire series. They're all like 300 pages, so it's not too hard to read and to get caught up with the series. I gave this a 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read was Ferris by Marissa Meyer. This was the prequel to the Lunar Chronicles, and it focuses on Queen Lavanna. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars because you really understand Queen Lavanna and her thought process behind all of the bad things that she does. I really sympathize with her. Not really. I understand her, and she's really interesting. She's psychologically a little off, but that's what makes it even greater. I love like knowing the psychology behind people and characters. This is only 222 pages, I think. Definitely read this after you've read the 3rd book in the series, which is Cress, because I feel like if you read this first, this will totally ruin everything. So definitely read this after Cress, and I think it should be required. After I read that, I picked up Love, Rosie by Cecilia Ahern, and I really enjoyed this. It makes me really want to see the movie with Lily Collins and Sam Claflin. I think that they could represent these characters very well. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I was so into it, and I loved it so much, but the thing is that I feel like it ran a little bit long. It could have been a lot shorter. This is a story about 2 people, Rosie and Alex, and they have grown up together. They are best friends, and this book goes from the ages of them being like 5 to like 50 or something like that. It's pretty crazy with the time that this all encompasses. That's also a reason why it's so long, is because it's such a long period of time that this one book covers. But you eventually realize that they are meant to be together, they are soulmates, but all of these circumstances keep getting in the way of them being together, and it's really frustrating. You just want them to get together, but that's the beauty of this book. And then I read 13 Reasons Why by Jay Asher. This has been on my bookshelf for such a long time. I've been meaning to read this for years and years. I think since like 9th grade I've been meaning to read this book, and I finally got around to reading it, and I'm so glad I did. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. This is about a boy named Clay Jensen who one day finds this box of tapes on his doorstep. He listens to them and realizes that the voice on the tapes is the voice of a girl named Hannah Baker who just committed suicide. He is also told by Hannah Baker on the tapes the 13 reasons why she committed suicide, and those 13 reasons why are the 13 people who receive the box of tapes. Clay gets really into the story because he really did like Hannah, and he goes to all the places that she mentions on the tapes. So you get to follow both his story and her story. It's really sad because you already know the outcome of her story from the beginning, and it's just really important because it shows you how little things can influence someone's entire lives and how you have an effect on other people's lives even if you aren't aware of it. The next book I read was The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I actually read it before when I was younger, so I'm happy that I had to read it for class. I really enjoy this story. It is a classic for a reason. The next 2 books that I read came from the same book but are 2 different stories, and they are Peter Pan and Kensington Gardens and Peter and Wendy by J.M. Barrie. He was the creator of Peter Pan, if you didn't know, but these 2 stories are pretty dang different from the Disney Peter Pan version that we know now, especially Peter Pan and Kensington Gardens, which was the first Peter Pan story. Actually, no, Peter Pan came from an earlier book that also J.M. Barrie wrote, but then he adapted it, which was basically the same story, into Peter Pan and Kensington Gardens, and then he made another adaptation of that book into Peter and Wendy, and then that book was adapted into the Disney Peter Pan version. There's a lot of adaptations happening all up in here. I really preferred Peter and Wendy over Peter Pan and Kensington Gardens just because Peter and Wendy is a play, and it's more like the Peter that we know now. Peter is a young boy instead of Peter Pan and Kensington Gardens. He's a baby, which is kind of weird because he's doing things that no baby should be able to do, and it's just very odd. Peter is like part bird. Everything's really weird in the first book. I gave Peter and Wendy 4 out of 5 stars, and I gave Peter Pan and Kensington Gardens 3 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was also for class. It was The Borrowers by Mary Norton. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Definitely my favorite of the books that we read. I just really like The Borrowers and all of the adaptations of The Borrowers, which it is The Secret Life of Arrietty and The Borrowers with Tom Felton. I love that movie. I grew up with it. I didn't know that it was a book until I was much older, but I'm happy I finally got around to reading it. My favorite thing about this book was definitely the imagery, especially the description of the things that the borrowers took and used as different things. Like, they took thimbles, if you can see right there, and they used them as like a pot or a glass, and they used like this spool of thread as a table or a chair. They used an entire potato as meals for a billion weeks. The first book that I read in April was Shopaholic and Baby by Sophie Kinsella, the 5th book in the Shopaholic series, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I didn't think it was as great as the previous ones, but I still really did like it. I hated Venetia in this book. She did such a good job of making me hate her with all of my soul. The next book I read was surprisingly for class, and it was Tom's Midnight Garden by Philippa Pierce. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I hadn't heard anything about this book until I picked it up, which I love going into books just blindly. This was about time travel, which is so cool, especially when it's in a classic. The last book I read for my class was Harriet the Spy by Louise Fitzhugh. I gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. I really want to watch the movie with Michelle Trachtenberg because 1, I really like her, and 2, I really liked this book. Harriet was such an interesting little kid. She was simultaneously very mature for her age, but also very ignorant. The next book I read was The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. This was the first book in the Raven cycle, and I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. The only complaint is that it was a little bit slow, but in hindsight, I think that that was pretty needed because there was a lot of character building and world building, and now I really care about every single character. They all have very distinct personalities, which I like. I hate when they all are pretty much the same, just with like one really big difference, but I feel like all of these are really human characters. The next book I read was Girl Online by Zoe Sugg and her ghostwriter. I gave it 1 out of 5 stars. I just could not finish the book. I got like 50 something pages in and I had to put it down. It was just really cringeworthy and I just couldn't push myself to continue on with the book. I thought that, like I said with The Sky is Everywhere, where she was trying to relate to a younger audience, I really thought that she was too, and she was saying some things that were just weird and cringeworthy, like the selfie king, or no, the walking selfie. That was a description of someone, and that just did not flow with me. The last book I read in April was Second Chance Summer by Morgan Matson. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I stayed up until 3 a.m. reading it, and I was just crying so much I couldn't get to sleep because I was just sitting there crying and just thinking about life and this book. It was so good. There's so much emotion, raw emotion in this book. I pretty much like all of her books equally, and by that I mean I am obsessed with all of her books. She is just such a fantastic writer, and I really recommend this book. I'm not going to tell you too much about it. Basically, it's about this girl named Taylor Edwards, and she has a history of running away from all of her problems, but one summer her dad is diagnosed with a medical condition, and they know that he is going to die in a couple of months. So for his last summer, they go back to her childhood lake house, where she has to confront some things that she ran away from, and it's really heartfelt, and I really recommend it. So that was my March and April wrap up. I hope you all enjoyed. Please request any videos you'd like me to make in the future down below, and I'll talk to you all later. Bye!